Go slow. I'm still a virgin. She whispered it in the dark, her voice trembling. Not from fear, not because she didn't want him, but because this moment, this entire night, meant something she had never allowed herself to feel before. He didn't move, he didn't rush. He simply looked at her eyes, soft breath steady, like he had been waiting to hear those words his entire life. The room around them was silent, but inside her everything pulsed. Olive Bennett had always thought that love came for everyone else. The brave ones, the beautiful ones, the people who didn't think too much before jumping in. But she was the quiet kind, the stay in on a Friday night kind, the carry guilt in your shoulders kind. And until Lucas Hale, no one had ever stayed long enough to see what was hidden underneath all of that. Weeks before this night, Olive was still in Vermont, a nurse in a town so small the grocery store closed before sunset. She lived in a little apartment above her mother's bakery. Her life was soft, predictable. There were always pies in the oven, cats wandering the sidewalks, and a radio station that played the same 6 songs on repeat. People in town said she had healing hands, that when Olive touched a patient, even the most stubborn fevers let go. But what they didn't know was that Olive gave so much of herself, she had nothing left at the end of each day. Nothing for herself. Nothing for love. Then one morning, standing by the coffee pot in the break room, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. Pale scrubs. Dark circles under her eyes. Smile tired from being too kind for too long. That same afternoon, she applied for a position she never thought she'd get. A communications assistant at Hale Foundation, one of the largest nonprofit healthcare groups in Colorado. It wasn't nursing, it wasn't patient care, but it was still something about healing, just from a different angle. To her surprise, she got the job, and just 2 weeks later, she was on a one-way bus to Denver, suitcase in one hand and her old brown leather journal in the other. She didn't cry leaving Vermont, but her mother did. She hugged Olive tightly outside the station, her flowered apron still tied around her waist. Don't forget, sweetheart, you deserve someone who brings you back to yourself. Now standing in front of the door to her tiny new apartment in Denver, Olive exhaled slowly. Everything was louder here, faster. The sidewalks were filled with voices and coffee cups and strangers rushing past each other without ever looking up. But underneath it all, she felt it, the tiniest flicker of something real. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The next day she would begin her new job, a fresh start, a chance to belong to a world she had only watched from a distance. What she didn't know was that across the city, inside a glass-walled office, high above downtown, a man named Lucas Hale was about to look at a list of new hires and pause when he saw her name. He wouldn't know why, not yet, but something about her name would catch him. And in just a few days, Olive Bennett and Lucas Hale would meet for the first time. Not through fate, not through magic, but through the simple, quiet decision of 2 people, each carrying their own wounds who didn't know they were about to change each other's lives forever. Olive arrived at the Hale Foundation headquarters 20 minutes early, on her first day standing outside the glass doors longer than she needed to. The building was a mix of old brick and sleek renovation, like someone had decided to leave the past intact, but add a shine of ambition on top. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and citrus-polished wood underfoot, and sunlight streaking across tall windows. She clutched her canvas tote bag, the strap damp, from where her palm had been sweating against it. Her badge photo was awkward, a little blurry, and she wore the same blue blouse her mother had ironed 3 times before she left Vermont. The receptionist greeted her with a polite nod and handed her a welcome packet, Floor 4 Communications. Her desk was by the window, not the kind of view that overlooked the city skyline, but it gave her a quiet look at the alley where food trucks lined up by noon. She liked it. She liked the plants people had placed near the window. She liked the quiet hum of productivity and the way no one seemed to shout over anyone else. Most of all, she liked how she felt invisible, but not in a bad way. In a way that gave her room to breathe. By 11:30, she was already adjusting copy on an email blast about a new free clinic opening in Aurora. She reread every sentence twice, checking for tone, for clarity, for the invisible thread that connected patients and people through words alone. At some point, someone brought her tea and set it by her elbow without saying anything. She didn't know who. The cup had a small sticker with her name on it, written in neat black pen. Lucas Hale, meanwhile, was in a meeting on the 12th floor, half listening to updates about their overseas projects. He had built this organization from his late 20s after stepping away from the pharmaceutical tech company that made him a billionaire before 30. The Hale Foundation wasn't born out of guilt, though everyone liked to assume that. It was born out of something harder to explain, a need to feel connected to things that mattered. He barely remembered what the turning point was. Only that after the accident, after he lost the woman he thought he'd marry, the silence in his penthouse had become unbearable. He had money, he had power, but nothing about his life made sense anymore. So he made something new, something different. Now every department functioned without him, but he still showed up early, still read every name on the hire list, still noticed when someone changed the way a press release read. That afternoon, he passed by Olive's desk on his way to the stairwell. No one used the stairs but him. He liked the quiet. She didn't see him at first. Her hair was pinned loosely, some strands falling near her cheek, and she was mouthing words to herself as she typed. He paused, just a second, just long enough to notice the cup of tea beside her. The next morning, Olive was fixing the margins on a print newsletter when he stopped beside her desk. She looked up, startled. He said that footer spacing is cleaner than last month's edition. Her eyes widened and she blinked, unsure whether to smile or apologize. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. "You're new here. Vermont, right?" She blinked again. "Yes, how did I read your file?" he said. Then softer. "We don't get many people from towns smaller than a zip code." She smiled, just enough for him to see a flash of surprise in it. Something changed after that. He started stopping by her desk more often, sometimes with small questions about layout, sometimes with no question at all. Sometimes just to lean on the edge of a nearby desk and sip his coffee in silence. She never tried to impress him, never flirted. She just did her work, quietly, diligently. But he noticed how she always had one earbud in, how she used yellow sticky notes instead of digital ones, how her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her mug, but her voice never did. They didn't know it yet, but something had already begun. Not love, not longing, but a subtle awareness. A recognition of another soul moving gently through a world that often forgot how to be kind. The first time Olive saw Lucas outside the office was purely accidental. It was Saturday morning. and she had gone to a quiet bookstore on 8th and Pearl, the kind with creaky wooden floors and handwritten shelf tags. She stood in the memoir section, flipping through a paperback on grief, when someone beside her reached for the same title. She turned, ready to step aside, and froze. Lucas. No suit, no clipboard, no polished shoes. Just jeans, a navy sweater, and that same unreadable calmness on his face. She expected him to be surprised, maybe awkward, but instead he smiled gently and said, "Good book." Heavy but honest. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He tilted his head slightly, reading the uncertainty in her eyes. "I come here every other weekend. Quietest corner of the city. I won't bother you if you want space." She let out a breath. "You're not bothering me." He glanced down at the book she was holding. "That one changed the way I think about loss. You've read it 3 times. He paused, then added, "Once during, once after, and once when I thought I was fine." The honesty of it struck her. Raw, unpolished. Not CEO polished, just real. She nodded again, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he broke the silence. "There's a bench in the back where no one ever sits. Want to read there?" She followed him. They didn't speak much after that, each with their own book, each lost in a world of paper and quiet. But something passed between them. Not flirtation, not tension, just presence. Over the next few weeks, their interactions grew deeper without ever being labeled. Lucas would bring her articles to proof and linger longer than needed. Olive would leave small sticky notes on his reports with book recommendations. One day she brought banana bread to the office, just a small loaf wrapped in wax paper left in the break room with a note. For anyone who had a hard week. Later that day, she found a thank you card on her desk. No name. Just a pressed lavender sprig tucked inside. She knew it was him, and he knew she knew, but they never talked about it. One Friday, he invited her to attend a community event with the foundation, a clinic opening in a shelter downtown. She hesitated. "It's not really my role, is it?" "You help communicate healing. That's a role anywhere," he said. She went. They stood side by side as volunteers unpacked boxes of supplies, and kids laughed in the distance. Lucas rolled up his sleeves and helped arrange medical kits. Olive watched him talk to a woman in her 60s who had lost both her sons to addiction. He didn't rush, didn't offer false hope, just listened. She realized then that Lucas Hale wasn't who people thought he was. He wasn't a recluse billionaire. He wasn't cold or arrogant. He was a man who carried silence like armor. A man who had known loss so intimately that he now built spaces for others to feel safe. That night on the way back, they sat in the back seat of a rideshare, quiet but close. Rain tapped gently on the window. She glanced over and found him watching her, his expression unreadable. He looked away quickly, like he hadn't meant to be caught. But something in his eyes lingered. The next week, she brought in a small framed photo to set on her desk. A picture of her and her mom outside the bakery, arms covered in flour. Lucas stopped by and stared at it for a moment. "You're closey, very." She raised me mostly on her own. Lucas nodded. "I lost my parents early. Grandmother raised me, strict but fair. I learned how to cook before I learned to drive." Olive smiled. "That's impressive," he smirked. "Or just survival." "I once burned pasta because I got too into a book." She laughed then, and he looked at her like he was memorizing the sound. After that, something shifted, slight but unmistakable. He began to find reasons to stay near her desk longer. She began to bring 2 teas in the morning, one with honey, one plain. He never asked which was his, he just knew. When a heavy snowstorm hit Denver one Thursday, the office emptied by noon. Olive stayed, not wanting to navigate the icy roads alone. Lucas appeared beside her around 3. "Want a ride home?" "You don't have to, I want to." They drove in near silence, the city blurred behind layers of white. When they reached her apartment, she hesitated. "Want to come up for coffee?" He did. Inside her apartment was warm, small, cluttered with books and soft lights. He looked around like it was a gallery. "This feels like you." She blushed. "That's either good or bad." "It's good, very good." She made coffee. They sat on the floor near the radiator mugs in hand and talked for hours. Not about work, not about grief, but about little things. Favorite childhood cartoons, foods they hated, places they'd never been. Around midnight, the lights flickered from wind. She lit a candle, and they sat in the golden glow. His hand brushed hers. He didn't move it away. Neither did she. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I've been thinking about you every day." Her breath caught. "Me too." He leaned in slowly, cautiously, then kissed her forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure why. He smiled, eyes soft. "For what? For seeing me?" He didn't answer. He just held her gaze a moment longer, then left. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because for the first time she felt like someone had reached past the noise and touched something real inside her, something quiet, something long ignored. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing. Lucas Hale wasn't just a man with wealth and silence. He was someone who had started to understand her in a way no one ever had. And for the first time, Olive wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something neither of them had the words for yet. The morning after the snowstorm, Olive arrived at the office early. She wore her thickest sweater, the navy one, with sleeves too long and a collar that brushed her jawline. Her cheeks were still pink from the wind when she stepped out of the elevator, heart strangely light. She hadn't spoken to Lucas since he left her apartment, but something unspoken now hovered between them, fragile but undeniable. That morning she found a folded note taped to her monitor. It wasn't signed, just a quote. "Some people arrive and make such a beautiful impact on your life, you can barely remember what life was like without them." Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the paper. She didn't need a signature. She already knew. That afternoon, Lena, her coworker from 2 desks over, waved her into the break room with a grin. "So when are you going to admit it?" Olive blinked. "Admit what? That the CEO is totally into you. Everyone sees it. The way he hovers near your desk." That's not subtle. Olive felt the warmth drain from her face. "It's not like that." Lena rolled her eyes. "Come on. We all placed bets last week. I've got $50 on you two kissing by Valentine's Day." Olive stared. "You're joking. You're not joking." Her voice was tight. Lena tilted her head, suddenly sheepish. "It's harmless. Everyone's just bored. It's not like it's personal." But to Olive it was. Suddenly, all the quiet mornings, the tea, the forehead kiss, the way he looked at her, it all felt exposed, reduced to office gossip. When she returned to her desk, the screen blurred. She blinked hard, trying to steady herself. She lasted 3 more hours before slipping out early. That night, Lucas texted her, "Just checking in. You okay?" She stared at the screen for a long time and didn't reply. The next morning, he stopped by her desk. She barely looked at him. "Everything all right?" he asked. Her tone was even. just tired. He hesitated, sensing the wall that hadn't been there before. She didn't invite him in, and he didn't push. Days passed. She kept her distance. He noticed, of course, but respected it. Until one evening during a gala event hosted by the foundation, they crossed paths again. Olive had been asked to attend by her manager, told she could help document the event for internal communications. She wore a soft gray dress, simple but elegant, her hair tucked into a low knot. Lucas saw her the moment she entered the hall. She didn't look his way. The event was elegant, full of donors and city officials. Lucas moved through the crowd with practiced charm, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. Halfway through the evening, he joined her near the refreshments table. "You look beautiful," he said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't think you'd notice." "Of course I noticed." She sipped her water carefully. "There's a rumor going around," she said after a beat, "that I'm just another version of someone you used to love. That I'm the replacement." Lucas froze. "Who told you that?" She met his gaze steady. "Does it matter? Is it true?" He stepped closer, voice low. "No, you're not a replacement, Olive. You're the first person I've let this close since I lost her, and you are nothing like her." Olive looked away. "Then why does it feel like I'm walking into a space that was never mine to begin with?" Lucas exhaled, visibly shaken. "I don't expect you to carry her memory. I expect you to carry only what we build from here." But she wasn't sure. She wanted to believe him, wanted it badly. But the idea of being someone's second chapter, when they hadn't finished grieving the first, it sat like weight in her chest. That night she left the event early, didn't say goodbye. She turned off her phone. For 3 days she disappeared, didn't come to work, didn't answer emails. On the 4th day, her mother called worried. Olive brushed it off with vague reassurances. She needed time, needed space to think. But her heart ached in a way it never had before. Because this time she hadn't just walked away from a job. She'd walked away from someone who had seen her in a way no one else ever had. Meanwhile, Lucas was unraveling in silence. He hadn't realized how much space she took up in his day until she was gone. He found himself rereading old memos just to see her handwriting. He stood outside her empty desk twice before catching himself. Then, on a quiet Friday morning, a small envelope arrived at his office. It wasn't addressed in Olive's handwriting. It was her mother's. Inside was a copy of something Olive had written years ago, a letter to herself. Lucas unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed slightly, the ink faded, but the words were clear. "Dear me, if you're still alone, if you still haven't let anyone love you, remember this. Love doesn't need a finish line. It just needs space and safety and someone who doesn't look away when you say you're afraid." Lucas sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. Then he stood. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just left. 30 minutes later, he stood in front of Olive's apartment building, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. He knocked once, then again. She opened the door slowly. Her eyes widened when she saw him. He held up the letter. "Your mom sent me this. She didn't know I was gone. She worried." He stepped inside. "I wanted to fix this sooner, but I didn't know how." She looked down. "I'm scared, Lucas. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than comfortable with anyone else." She shook her head. "You don't need me. You're everything already." "No, I have everything. But I feel nothing without you." She took a shaky breath. "I'm not good at this. I don't know how to be enough for someone like you." You already are. You were the moment you looked at me without flinching. Silence fell between them, heavy but honest. She whispered, I don't want to be part of your past. I want to be something you build from. He stepped closer, voice breaking. You already are. Please let me prove that. She didn't answer with words. She simply stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. He closed his arms wrapping around her like she was the only thing anchoring him to this world. Neither of them knew what would come next. But standing there in that small apartment, filled with unsaid things, they made a silent promise to try, to begin, and to never let each other slip through the cracks again. The days that followed moved slowly, not because time dragged, but because every moment between Olive and Lucas began to carry weight. They had not labeled what they were rebuilding. There was no title, no status update, no neat definition. But something unspoken had shifted. Lucas began walking Olive home after work. Sometimes they talked the entire way. Sometimes they didn't say much at all. But their silences grew comfortable, no longer filled with hesitation or fear. One evening, as they passed a bookstore with a display of old poetry collections in the window, Olive paused. She pressed her palm lightly against the glass eyes, scanning the worn covers. Lucas stepped beside her. You want to go in? She shook her head. No, I just like knowing they're there. Books like those make the world feel a little softer. He nodded. So do you. She looked up surprised. You make the world softer, Olive, and I don't think you even realize it. She didn't reply, but later alone in her apartment, she replayed those words like a record she didn't want to end. The next week, she invited him in for dinner. She had spent the afternoon carefully preparing a recipe from her mother's notebook lemon thyme, chicken roasted potatoes, and honeyed carrots. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Lucas arrived carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. They looked a little out of place in his hands, but somehow perfect too. These reminded me of you, he said, simply placing them in a mason jar she handed him. Dinner was quiet, filled with clinking silverware and soft jazz playing from her phone speaker. She was nervous, but he never made her feel like she had to impress him. After they cleared the dishes, he asked if she had anything to read. She hesitated before pulling a notebook from her shelf. It was one of her private journals, nothing too revealing but still personal. She handed it to him, heart thudding. He flipped through, carefully reading a page. Here, a line there. Then he looked at her. You write like someone who's never been allowed to say what she really feels. She smiled weakly. I guess I always felt safer in silence. Lucas closed the notebook gently. You don't have to stay quiet anymore, not with me. Later that night, he didn't stay. He kissed her hand, told her to rest, and left without asking for anything more. It became their rhythm, slow, intentional, patient. And yet, despite the softness growing between them, Olive still carried uncertainty. One evening, Lucas invited her to a dinner hosted by one of the foundation's largest donors. It wasn't a gala or public event, just a small gathering at a brownstone in the city's historic district. She agreed reluctantly. She wore a simple black dress and borrowed earrings from Lena, who had since become more supportive, sensing Olive's walls lowering. When they arrived, Lucas introduced her not as a guest or colleague, but simply as Olive. The way he said her name made it sound like a title all its own. Throughout the evening, guests approached Lucas with praise, ideas, questions about expansion. Olive stood beside him, offering polite smiles, but her discomfort grew. At one point, a woman in her 50s, perfectly tailored and elegantly poised, turned to her with a curious smile. "So how long have you been working for the foundation?" "A few months," Olive replied. "I'm on the communications team." The woman nodded slowly. "And how long have you been seeing Lucas?" There was no malice in her voice, just pointed curiosity. Olive froze for half a second. Lucas stepped in smoothly. "Long enough to know she's not like anyone else." The woman raised her brows and sipped her wine. After she walked away, Olive leaned closer. "Was that necessary?" He looked down at her. "Yes." Later, as they left the brownstone and walked under the soft city lights, Olive stopped on the steps. "You don't have to protect me like that." He turned to her. "I'm not protecting you. I'm telling the truth." She searched his face. "Do you mean it? That I'm not like anyone else?" Lucas stepped closer, hands in his coat pockets. "Olive, I've never met someone who makes me want to become a better version of myself without asking for anything. That's not normal. That's extraordinary." She wanted to believe him, and in that moment she did. That night she invited him inside. He didn't hesitate. Inside, the apartment felt warmer than usual, or maybe it was just them. She made tea while he flipped through the same notebook he had read from weeks earlier. They sat on the couch closer than before. His arm rested along the back, his knee touched hers. He turned to her, voice low. "I don't want to rush this." She looked at him, heart pounding. "Neither do I." He cupped her face gently. "But I do want you to know something. There's no version of this where I leave." Her breath caught. "Why? Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm home." She didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. Not out of desperation or impulse, but out of something deeper, something earned. The kiss was soft, slow, and when it ended, she rested her forehead against his. "I've never done this before," she whispered. His brow furrowed slightly. Any of this. I've never let someone in like this." He kissed her again, gently. "Then let's take our time." He stayed that night, not for what others might expect, but simply to hold her. They lay side by side, hands entwined, breaths slowing in sync. And as the night deepened, so did everything between them. Trust, hope, the quiet beginning of something real. And though neither of them said the word out loud, they both knew. This wasn't just love. This was something that would last. 2 weeks passed, filled with the quiet rhythm of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Olive and Lucas found themselves slipping into routines neither had known they needed. Morning texts turned into shared breakfasts. Quiet evenings became shared dinners on her couch, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with whatever she managed to throw together. He once arrived with 2 cartons of soup and a confused expression after trying to cook. She laughed harder than she had in years and made him promise never to step near a stove again without supervision. It wasn't perfect. There were still silences, still careful pauses, where the weight of the past threatened to creep back in. But neither ran from it. They talked. They learned each other's rhythms. Lucas began opening up in ways Olive hadn't expected. He showed her the building where he'd grown up with his grandmother. They drove past the graveyard where his fiancée was buried, not stopping, just acknowledging. Olive listened, never pressing. He told her about the night of the accident, how he had stayed late in the office, and she'd been driving alone in the rain, how he blamed himself, how he thought for years he didn't deserve anything after that. Olive never told him he was wrong. She just took his hand and held it until he couldn't speak anymore. For the first time in his life, Lucas didn't feel like a man performing strength. He felt seen, understood, loved. Then came the phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon. Olive was preparing a new draft for an internal newsletter when her phone buzzed. The hospital. Her mother had collapsed at work. A minor heart episode. The nurse said nothing immediately fatal, but she'd need a few days of monitoring. Olive left the office without a word, her heart pounding. She caught the next train back to Vermont, the cold window pressing against her forehead as the landscape blurred by. Her mother was stable, tired, but recovering well. Olive stayed by her side in the hospital, brushing her hair back gently and reading to her like she used to as a child. When her mother finally fell asleep, Olive stepped into the hallway and dialed Lucas. It went to voicemail. She tried again. Still nothing. By the second day, she started to worry. By the third, she stopped calling altogether. When her mother was discharged, Olive stayed in Vermont longer than she intended. She returned to the bakery, to the familiar scent of cinnamon and butter, to the hum of small-town life that once felt like a cage but now held a strange comfort. She needed time to think, needed time away from the speed of something she hadn't realized she was falling into so fast. Lucas, meanwhile, had spiraled. When Olive disappeared without warning, he had panicked. He called, texted, drove past her apartment, went to the office hoping for some clue. Then he stopped, because deep down something old had been triggered. That same quiet voice from the past whispering, "You're not worth staying for. You never were." On the 6th day, a knock sounded on Olive's door. She opened it slowly and blinked in disbelief. Margaret Hale stood there, Lucas's aunt, holding a slim envelope. "He's not okay," Margaret said simply. "You don't know this, but I see him when he's hurting. And he's been hurting since the day you left." Olive swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to leave like that. I just needed to be here." Margaret nodded. "Then show him. Give him something back." She handed Olive the envelope and left without waiting for a reply. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter, in Lucas's handwriting. "Olive, I don't know where you went or why, and I don't need an explanation. I only need you to know this. You didn't break anything. You didn't fail. I love you. Not because you make me better or because we fit perfectly, but because you show up as you are and let me do the same. That's the kind of love I never believed was possible. Until you. I miss you. I miss your laugh, your tea, your silence, all of it. If you still want this, I'm still here. Yours always, Lucas." She read it twice, then a third time, then packed her bag. When she arrived back in Denver, it was almost midnight. The air was cold and dry. Her apartment felt untouched, almost too quiet. She didn't stop there. She walked the 6 blocks to Lucas's building. Heart pounding with every step, she rang the buzzer. No answer. She tried again. Then a voice came through, groggy and low. "Who is it? It's me. Olive." A pause, then the door unlocked. When she reached the top floor, he was already at the door, barefoot, wearing a gray sweater, and disbelief. "I didn't think you'd come." She stepped closer. "I shouldn't have left that way. I was scared. I thought if I stayed, I'd lose myself." He nodded slowly. "And now I know. Love isn't supposed to erase you. It's supposed to meet you where you are." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin with a scribbled note. A quote from one of the books they'd read together. "Real love feels like coming home, not losing yourself." He read it, then looked at her. "I missed you." She stepped into his arms without another word. The embrace was deep, full, the kind that doesn't ask questions. That night, they didn't talk much. They just sat on his couch, fingers laced, heartbeats slowing back into rhythm. For the first time, everything felt still, not perfect, but real. When she rested her head on his shoulder, he kissed the top of her hair and whispered, "You came back." She looked up at him. "I was always coming back. I just had to remember where home was." And for the first time, Lucas Hale believed that love could stay, could return, could grow even after being tested. The next morning, the world was quiet again. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Because somewhere between goodbye and I missed you, they had chosen to begin again. 6 months later, summer returned to Denver with long golden evenings and slow sunsets that painted the sidewalks in soft amber. Olive's apartment now had 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, an extra coat draped over the back of her reading chair, and mugs that never made it back to the kitchen, because Lucas always left them half-finished while reading her journal entries. They had settled into something gentle, not flashy, not perfect, but deeply, unapologetically real. Together they started a project that had lived in Olive's mind for years. It was called Still Room, a small initiative under the Hale Foundation that trained young caregivers and nurses not just in medical procedure, but in how to communicate healing. It was a concept Olive had first scribbled in her notebook long before she ever met Lucas, and now it lived in a brick and glass corner of downtown, with windows that stayed open in the summer and string lights that stayed on well past sunset. Lucas never tried to take credit. He let her lead, stepping back when needed, stepping in only when she reached for him. Every Friday, they stayed late reorganizing shelves, sipping lukewarm tea, discussing new ideas for workshops. Their favorite part was the final hour before closing, when the space grew quiet, and they would just sit on the floor, backs to the wall, not saying much. Sometimes they shared memories. Sometimes they just let the silence stretch. Olive had never felt more at peace. The city that once overwhelmed her now felt like a map she knew by heart. The man who once seemed unreachable now left socks on her floor and sticky notes on her fridge that said things like, "Don't forget to breathe," and "I like your messy hair best." One evening after a workshop had wrapped and the last attendee had left, Lucas returned from the storage room holding a small gray box. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the soft light of the studio, the buzz of the street, faint behind him. Olive looked up from the table where she was organizing pamphlets. "Is everything okay?" Lucas walked over and sat beside her on the floor. He opened the box. Inside was a ring platinum, simple, elegant, with a pale green stone that reminded her of Vermont pine trees after the rain. "I didn't want to do this in a fancy restaurant or on a mountaintop," he said. "I wanted to do it here, where we built something that matters, where you made me believe again." Olive stared, tears already forming. Lucas reached for her hand. "You don't have to answer now. I just need you to know this is it for me. It's always been you." She didn't speak. She only nodded over and over, then whispered, "Yes. Of course, yes." A month later, they held a small ceremony in the mountains, just family and a few close friends. Olive wore a simple cream dress. Lucas wore a navy vest and his late grandmother's pocket watch. They wrote their own vows and forgot half of them. They laughed, cried, and kissed under a sky that felt wide enough to hold everything they had ever been through. That night, back in the quiet of their new apartment, Olive stood by the bedroom window, barefoot, her dress still glowing in the warm lamplight. Lucas approached her slowly. He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. She looked at him, voice trembling. "Go slow. I'm still a virgin." He didn't flinch, didn't smile like it was something small. He just leaned forward and whispered, "Then I'll go slow. I'll listen, and I'll love you one breath at a time." There were no fireworks, no grand soundtrack, just two people choosing each other in the stillness, writing the first page of forever with soft hands and open hearts.